It was supposed to be a celebration. My best friend Mark's wedding. I had spent weeks helping him and Julia with every detail, making sure everything was perfect. The venue was beautiful, the guests were all smiles, and the air was thick with excitement. But as soon as I stepped into the ballroom, I knew something was wrong. The crystal chandeliers gleamed overhead, the floral arrangements were nothing short of stunning, and laughter echoed through the room. But beneath the surface, there was an unsettling tension, one that I couldn't quite shake. Julia looked radiant as any bride should, but there was a distance in her eyes. It wasn't the kind of distance that comes from being overwhelmed with joy. It felt more like something was quietly brewing beneath her smile. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling lingered. I had planned to give a heartfelt toast, something to acknowledge the long journey Mark and I had shared as friends, and to celebrate his new chapter with Julia. But everything changed when I saw my father-in-law, Victor Edwards, standing at the front of the room. He was holding an empty glass, his fingers tight around the stem, and his gaze was fixed on me with a cold, almost predatory intensity. The air around him seemed to freeze. His presence had that effect on me every time. This constant reminder that, no matter how hard I worked or how much I accomplished, I would never be good enough in his eyes. The Edwards family had always looked down on me, always made me feel like an outsider. They were the picture of old money, polished and perfect, and I, in their eyes, was just a guy trying to prove his worth in a world that had never accepted me. My wife, Emma, sat beside me, her face pale. She avoided my gaze, which told me everything I needed to know. She knew exactly what was coming. Her younger brother, Luke, was smirking as he fiddled with his bow tie, clearly amused by the tension building between us. I couldn't help but notice how comfortable they all were in this world, how they had molded themselves into something untouchable. And then there was Victor. I could see it in the way he stood, with his chest puffed out and his gaze sharp. He had always found a way to remind me that I didn't belong. Tonight, however, something felt different, as if he had been waiting for this moment too. Victor raised his glass, his voice commanding attention. "To Mark and Julia," he said, his words slow and deliberate, dripping with feigned warmth. "May their union be as successful as those who know how to keep their fortunes intact." There was no mistaking the barb hidden in his tone. It wasn't just a toast, it was a direct jab at me, as if he was implying that success could only be defined by wealth, by lineage, by what you could buy or sell, not by hard work or perseverance. I could feel the sting of his words, but what stung even more was the realization that he had been subtly undermining me for years. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't the first time he had dismissed my accomplishments or made me feel small. It was just the first time I couldn't ignore it anymore. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't stay silent. I had spent too long swallowing his insults, nodding politely, pretending that it didn't bother me. But now, in front of all these people, in front of my wife and her family, I had reached my breaking point. Without thinking, I stood up, my voice cutting through the room. "I think that's a toast we can all raise a glass to," I said, my words sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. The room grew silent, all eyes on me. Victor's gaze turned cold, a flicker of disdain crossing his face. "Well, Jonathan," he said, his voice like ice, "I suppose some of us think success is more than just numbers on a spreadsheet." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent years building my career in real estate, turning distressed properties into thriving developments. But to Victor and his family, I was just the son-in-law who couldn't possibly understand their world of inherited wealth. I had worked hard, invested time and energy into my work, but to them, it wasn't enough. Not because I wasn't good at what I did, but because I wasn't born into their world. I felt the weight of everyone's gaze on me. Emma's hand brushed mine, a silent plea for me to let it go, but it was too late. I had been silent for far too long. Tonight, it was time to stop playing the role of the quiet, subservient son-in-law. It was time to take control. I stood a little taller, forcing myself to look Victor in the eye. "No, Victor," I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside me. "I think I've been too patient for too long." I could see the flicker of surprise in his eyes, but it wasn't enough to stop me. This wasn't just about a toast anymore. It was about everything that had built up over the years of his dismissive comments, the years of feeling like I was never good enough for his daughter, for his family. Turning to Emma, I let the words fall from my lips before I could stop them. I'm done. I could feel the room tense, the air thick with uncertainty. Emma's eyes widened in shock, but I wasn't going to back down. She had no idea what I had been planning, what I had quietly observed over the last few months. She had no idea how much this moment had been building inside me. But now, it was happening. The mask was coming off. The life I had been living, pretending to fit in with a family who never accepted me, was over. And it was time to take control of my future. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for someone to do something, to say something. But no one did. Everyone just stared at me, unsure how to react. I could feel their eyes on me, the Edwards family, my wife, the other guests, all waiting for me to back down. But I wasn't going to. I was done being that quiet guy who took whatever came his way, who let the insults slide, who silently endured their sneers and sideways glances. Tonight was different. Tonight I was in control. Emma's grip on my hand tightened. A silent plea for me to stop, but it only made my resolve stronger. She had no idea what I'd been planning. I had kept it all quiet, calculated. I had spent months gathering information, watching and waiting for the right moment. And now that moment had arrived. My eyes locked with hers as I stood there, feeling the weight of the situation. The last few years of my life, married to her, trying to prove myself worthy in her family's eyes, flashed through my mind. But tonight, I was done with all of it. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. I wasn't going to play by their rules. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. And I'm taking action against your father. He's been hiding his financial troubles from everyone, but not from me. The words seemed to hang in the air, and I saw the shock on Emma's face, her expression a mixture of disbelief and fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance to interrupt. I had made up my mind. This wasn't just about Victor anymore. It was about me, about reclaiming my dignity, my worth, my future. I pulled out my phone and showed her the divorce papers. It's done, I said, barely registering the way her face crumpled as the shock set in. I'm not going to stay in a marriage where I'm constantly belittled, where I'm treated like I don't matter. The room was frozen. No one knew what to say. I could hear the murmurs of the other guests, the uncomfortable shifting of chairs. But I didn't care. I had never cared more about anything in my life than I did in that moment. I wasn't doing this for Emma or for anyone else in that room. I was doing this for me. Victor's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. His eyes burned with fury, but there was something else there, too. Fear. I had caught him off guard, and for once, he didn't know how to react. He was the one used to being in control, used to having the power. But tonight, that power had slipped right through his fingers. You think this is funny? He spat, his voice low and threatening. You think you can just walk in here and tear everything apart? I didn't flinch. No, Victor. I'm not here to tear anything apart. I'm here to fix it. And I'm starting with you. I had known for months about the cracks in Victor's empire. I had been quietly watching him, tracking his real estate deals, his investments. He had always prided himself on his success, on his legacy. But I knew the truth. His empire was built on debt, on loans he could barely keep up with, on properties that were failing. The cracks were deep, and I had spent enough time in the industry to recognize when someone was holding on by a thread. I own your mortgages, I said calmly, watching as the words sank in. I bought the notes on your properties months ago, and now I'm calling them in. You're in default on 4 of them. The gasps around the room were audible, but I didn't need to hear them. I could see the fear spreading across Victor's face. He had always seen me as small, as insignificant, as someone who could never challenge him. But he was wrong. I had been watching, biding my time, and now I was taking back control. Victor stumbled back, his grip on his glass tightening. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice shaking now. He was panicking, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. I'm talking about your empire crumbling, I replied, my voice cold. Your businesses, your properties, they're nothing without the foundation you've built on lies. You've been living in denial, but I've been watching. You've been over-leveraged for years, and now you're going to pay the price." I turned to Emma, who was staring at me in disbelief. "And you, Emma," I continued, my voice softer but no less firm. "I know about the money you've been hiding. You think I didn't notice the accounts, the transfers, the way you've been shielding yourself from this? You're not as innocent in all this as you think." Her face drained of color, and I could see the guilt in her eyes. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, but then the reality hit me. She had never stood up for me. Not once. Every time her family had insulted me, belittled me, she had stayed silent. She had chosen them over me, and I wasn't going to keep playing the fool. The room was chaos now, with everyone speaking over each other, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But I didn't care. I had made my move, and nothing could change it. I was walking away, and I was going to build a life on my terms. I turned to leave, but as I walked toward the door, I heard Emma calling after me. Her voice cracked as she tried to reach me, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Not after everything. Not after she had let her family treat me like this for so long. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, I was in control. I had taken the power back, and now it was time to build something that was truly mine. Something that no one could ever take away from me again. The days that followed that night were a blur of paperwork, legal meetings, and endless phone calls. My lawyer, Simon, was relentless. He worked around the clock to make sure everything was in order, every step taken with precision. I knew I had made the right decision, but as the reality of what I'd done sank in, I couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. Walking away from Emma, from the life I had built with her, wasn't easy, but I knew it had to be done. For years, I had tried to fit into her world, to win her family's approval. I had tolerated the snide remarks, the subtle digs, the way they made me feel small and insignificant. But that night, when I finally stood up for myself, I realized something important. I wasn't just walking away from Emma. I was walking away from everything that had held me back. The divorce papers were filed quickly, but what came next was the hardest part. I had spent so much time trying to be the man that Emma's family wanted me to be that I forgot what it meant to be the man I wanted to be. I couldn't keep living my life under their shadow, constantly seeking approval from people who would never respect me. I needed to build something for myself, on my own terms. It wasn't just about taking down Victor, although that was certainly a satisfying part of it. It was about taking control of my life. The Edwards family had always seen me as an outsider, someone who didn't belong. But I wasn't going to let their opinion define me anymore. Victor fought back, of course. He wasn't used to losing, and certainly not to someone he considered beneath him. But the truth was, I had already won. His empire was built on lies, on deals that should never have been made, on properties that were sinking into the ground. I had been watching for months, tracking his every move, and the cracks in his foundation were easy to see. The moment I made my move, everything began to unravel. The properties that had once been his pride and joy were now in my hands. The loans he had ignored, the ones he thought he could brush off, were now due. He had no choice but to watch as his empire crumbled. I wasn't looking for revenge, at least not in the way people might expect. Sure, it felt good to watch him squirm, to see his world fall apart, but what I really wanted was justice. He had spent years making me feel inferior, like I was nothing. He thought he could crush me with his wealth and his influence, but I wasn't going to let him. The truth is, I had built something of my own. It wasn't as flashy as his commercial real estate empire, but it was real, and it was mine. It was time for me to step into the light and stop letting other people define me. Emma tried to reach out, of course. She called me several times, her voice always trembling, pleading for us to talk. But I didn't answer. I couldn't. The betrayal I felt was too deep. She had never stood up for me when her family made me feel small. Not once had she defended me. Every time Victor made one of his snide comments, every time Luke had that smug look on his face, Emma had stayed silent. She had chosen her family over me, and that was something I couldn't forgive. Months passed, and the process of tearing down the Edwards empire continued. Their assets were liquidated, properties were sold, and their name in the business world began to lose its luster. It was like watching a sinking ship. But the more I watched, the more I realized how far I had come. I had built a life for myself, one that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I was making decisions that were mine to make, and for the first time in years, I felt free. One day, as I sat in my new office overlooking the city skyline, I got a call from Simon. "It's done," he said. "Everything's been finalized. The Edwards family is finished." The words didn't feel as satisfying as I thought they would. I hadn't done this for the satisfaction of bringing them down. I had done it to reclaim my own life. Still, there was a sense of closure, a feeling that I had finally put the last pieces of this puzzle together. I had taken control, and no one could take that away from me. But even as I moved forward, a part of me knew there was still one more piece left. I had spent so much time focused on the destruction of the Edwards family that I hadn't taken the time to figure out what came next for me. I wasn't just done with Emma or her family. I was done with that version of myself too. The quiet, overlooked man who had let his worth be defined by others. I was done being the man who didn't fight back. I needed to find something more, something that mattered beyond the battle I had just fought. I didn't want to be the man who had taken down an empire just to replace it with another version of the same emptiness. I wanted more. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I had to do to get it. But that would come later. For now, I was letting go. Letting go of the anger, the hurt, and the past. The future was wide open, and I was ready to walk into it. It was time to build something real, something that was truly mine. The months that followed were a whirlwind, but in a way, I welcomed the chaos. The legal battles with the Edwards family were over, and I had emerged victorious. But the victory, while satisfying, didn't feel like the end of the journey. In some ways, it felt like the beginning of something much bigger, something I had been too afraid to truly pursue until now. I threw myself into my work with a renewed sense of purpose. My real estate ventures had been steadily growing, but now, without the weight of the Edwards family hanging over me, I could see the full scope of what I had built. I no longer cared about proving anything to anyone, especially not to the people who had never seen my worth. I had realized that my success wasn't about making the right deals or acquiring the right properties. It was about building a future on my own terms, free from the constraints of family expectations and the pressure to conform. I didn't expect it to be easy, and it wasn't. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom that I had never experienced before. The daily grind of proving myself to Emma's family, the endless efforts to gain their approval, had drained me in ways I didn't fully understand until now. When I stepped away from all of it, I could finally breathe. I could think clearly, and perhaps most importantly, I could make decisions based on what I truly wanted, not based on what anyone else thought was best for me. I started investing more strategically, branching out into new areas of real estate that excited me. I had always been drawn to urban redevelopment, finding old, rundown neighborhoods and turning them into thriving communities. Now, without the pressure of Victor's disapproval looming over me, I was able to take risks I had once been too cautious to consider. I had learned that risk wasn't something to avoid, it was something to embrace. That's how growth happened. That's how success happened. It was around this time that I met Sarah Mitchell. She was the director of the Modern Art Foundation, and she had come to me with a proposition. She had heard about my success in real estate and wanted me to consider donating to the foundation's expansion project. At first, I thought it would be just another charity pitch, but Sarah was different. She wasn't looking for a handout. She was looking for a partner. We met several times to discuss the foundation's goals, and I was captivated by her passion for the arts. It wasn't just about the money for her. It was about creating something that could leave a lasting impact on the community. The more we talked, the more I realized that this was something I could get behind. It wasn't about making money or gaining prestige. It was about creating something that would enrich people's lives. I knew that's the kind of legacy I wanted to build, not just in real estate, but in everything I did. Sarah and I grew closer over the following months. She was everything Emma hadn't been: independent, driven, and most importantly, unafraid to speak her mind. I found myself drawn to her energy, her vision, and the way she made me feel like I mattered for the right reasons. Not because of my wealth or status, but because of who I was and what I brought to the table. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. But even as I enjoyed spending more time with Sarah, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had spent so much time focusing on rebuilding my career and my life after the divorce that I hadn't really stopped to think about what I wanted out of a relationship. Sarah was amazing, no doubt about that, but I still felt a lingering emptiness inside me. I realized that what I had built wasn't enough. Not because it wasn't successful, but because I hadn't taken the time to reconnect with myself, to truly understand who I was, without the shadows of Emma and her family hanging over me. That's when it hit me. The real work wasn't just about professional success. It was about understanding my own identity and what I wanted out of life. For the first time, I began to ask myself the tough questions. What kind of man did I want it to be? What kind of future did I want to build? And what kind of person did I want to share it with? I knew that I needed to take the time to focus on myself, to figure out what truly mattered to me beyond the business deals and the financial success. Sarah was a part of that journey, but I knew that my growth wasn't dependent on anyone else. It was about me finding my own path, my own sense of purpose, and my own happiness. So I made a decision. I took a step back from the rush of work, from the pressure of constantly pushing forward, and allowed myself the space to just be. I spent more time reflecting, traveling, and reconnecting with the things I had lost sight of during all those years of trying to prove myself. I learned that success wasn't about constantly achieving. It was about finding balance, about knowing when to push forward and when to let go. And as I began to focus on myself, I realized that everything else began to fall into place. My business thrived because I was more focused, more grounded. My relationship with Sarah deepened because I was no longer seeking validation, but simply enjoying the connection we had built. And most importantly, I found peace within myself. I was no longer defined by what I had lost or what others had taken from me. I was defined by who I had become, and that was more than enough. The next few months felt like a different life entirely. Everything seemed to align in ways I hadn't expected, but at the same time, it was exactly what I needed. I had stepped away from the whirlwind of constant battles and expectations, and for the first time, I felt like I could finally take a breath. No longer tethered to the Edwards family or their constant undermining of me, I was free to focus on the things that truly mattered to me. Sarah had been a breath of fresh air. Her energy and passion for the Modern Art Foundation had sparked something inside me. When we first met, I was cautious. I had no interest in getting tangled up in another commitment, especially not in the aftermath of everything that had happened with Emma and her family. But Sarah wasn't like anyone I had ever met. She wasn't after my money or my status. She wasn't interested in making small talk about luxury cars or private clubs. She cared about making a difference, about bringing art to communities that needed it, about leaving behind a legacy of cultural richness. That was something I could get behind, and it was something that felt real, something that connected to my core in ways I hadn't realized I was missing. As I worked alongside Sarah to support the foundation, I found myself rediscovering a side of me that had been buried under years of pressure to conform. I realized that what I had truly wanted, deep down, wasn't just success or wealth. It was meaning. It was purpose. The real estate deals, the acquisitions, the constant pursuit of more, it had never filled the void inside me. But the foundation, the way it aimed to transform lives through culture and creativity, had given me a sense of direction I hadn't felt in years. I started to understand that the life I had been living wasn't really my own. For too long, I had been trying to prove my worth to people who didn't even care. I had spent so much time chasing approval, first from Victor, then from Emma, and from everyone who looked at me as if I wasn't enough, that I had lost sight of what truly mattered. Now I was learning to chase my own dreams, not the ones imposed on me. But it wasn't just work that was changing. My relationship with Sarah was evolving too. In the beginning, I was still cautious. I had been burned before, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to open up again. But as we spent more time together, as we worked side by side on the foundation and talked about our lives outside of business, I began to realize that she wasn't like Emma. Sarah didn't need me to be something I wasn't. She didn't need me to be a wealthy businessman or a success story. She saw me, not as the man I had been trying to be for everyone else, but as who I truly was. Someone looking for depth, someone who wanted to make an impact. And maybe, just maybe, I was beginning to think that I was worthy of love and respect without having to prove anything. For the first time, I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I was simply looking for someone to walk beside me. And with Sarah, I felt like I had found that. She was independent, strong, and confident in her own right. She wasn't enamored by my wealth, and she didn't expect me to be perfect. She was comfortable with who she was, and that made me feel comfortable with who I was. One evening, after a long day of meetings for the foundation, Sarah and I found ourselves on the rooftop of my office building, watching the sunset. The city sprawled out beneath us, the lights starting to twinkle in the growing dusk. It felt like a moment suspended in time. I had everything I needed in that moment: peace, clarity, and a sense of purpose that had been absent for so long. "You know, I never thought I'd be standing here," Sarah said, looking out at the horizon. "A year ago, I was just trying to keep this foundation afloat, working day and night to make it happen. But now, it feels like everything is falling into place." I smiled, taking a deep breath. "It's funny, isn't it? How things can change so quickly. Just when I thought I had everything figured out, I realized I was chasing the wrong things." Sarah turned to face me, her eyes soft but knowing. "And what is it that you're chasing now?" I paused for a moment, taking in the question. I could feel the weight of everything I had learned over the past year, the lessons from my battles, the pain of letting go, the satisfaction of finally being free. "I'm chasing something that's real," I said quietly. "Something that matters. Not to anyone else, but to me." She smiled, and it was like the world had shifted into place. In that moment, I realized that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along. Not success, not wealth, but purpose. And the best part was that I didn't have to do it alone. Our relationship wasn't perfect, and I knew there were still challenges ahead. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was walking the path I was meant to walk. Sarah and I had a partnership built on mutual respect, and together, we were going to make a difference. The foundation was just the beginning, and as I looked at Sarah, I knew we had a lot more to build, both in our work and in our lives. The freedom I had fought for, the freedom to define my own success and happiness, had brought me to this moment. And for the first time, I could say I was truly happy. Not because of what I had achieved, but because I had finally found my way. And I was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed felt like an unfolding story, one where I was finally taking charge of my own narrative, and for the first time in a long time, it felt right. The foundation was doing well, and Sarah and I were more aligned than ever. We had built a solid working relationship, but more than that, I began to realize how much we were growing together, personally. The more I worked alongside her, the more I discovered how much I had missed having someone in my life who was equally driven, equally committed to making a difference. She didn't need me to validate her, nor did she need to impress anyone. We were building something real, and that made all the difference. But as everything in my life started falling into place, I couldn't ignore the lingering sense that something was still missing. My professional success had taken a huge leap forward, and I had freed myself from the toxic shadows of Emma and her family. But I still hadn't fully reconciled with the past. There were pieces of me I hadn't addressed, parts of my life that I had spent years avoiding. My past had shaped who I was, but I realized that if I didn't deal with it properly, it would always hang over me like an unfinished chapter. I couldn't escape it forever, so I began the slow, difficult process of confronting it. The first step was Emma. I knew I had to face her, not for her, but for me. I needed closure. I couldn't keep running from the ghost of a marriage that was never really mine. We hadn't spoken since the night I left. She'd tried to reach out a few times, but I'd ignored her calls. I wasn't angry anymore. I had let the rage go. But the resentment, the disappointment, those feelings had lingered far longer than I had realized. I had built my entire identity for years around the idea of proving myself to her and her family. That was a weight I had carried for too long, and it was time to set it down for good. So, I called her. I didn't expect anything to come from it, but I knew I needed to hear her side of the story, as much as I needed her to hear mine. When she picked up the phone, I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "Jonathan," she said, almost in a whisper. "You're actually calling. I am." I replied, my voice steady, though I could feel my heart pounding. "We need to talk." There was silence on the other end, but after a moment, she agreed. "Okay. Where?" I suggested a quiet cafe, somewhere neutral. No fancy restaurants or places that held any history between us. We didn't need that kind of pressure. When I saw her sitting there, looking smaller than I remembered, it took everything I had not to turn around and walk away. She had always been beautiful, but the woman in front of me was someone I didn't recognize. She was no longer the confident, independent woman I had married. She looked lost, worn down by her choices and the wreckage she had left behind. We sat down in silence for a moment, neither of us knowing exactly where to begin. Finally, I spoke. "You know, when I left that night, I thought I was doing it to free myself. But I think, if I'm honest, I did it to punish you. I wanted you to feel what I felt all those years." She nodded, eyes welling up. "I understand that. I never saw it. I was too caught up in everything else. I was ashamed of how I treated you." "Emma," I said, my voice softer now, "I don't need your apology. I don't need you to fix anything. But I need you to understand that I had to let go of the version of you that I was holding on to. That woman, the one who stood by while your family tore me down, she wasn't who I thought you were, and I can't live with that woman in my mind anymore." The tears she had been fighting finally spilled over. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was just so lost, too, trying to keep everyone happy, trying to stay in my father's good graces. But I failed you. I failed us." I took a deep breath. It wasn't the closure I had expected, but it was the closure I needed. "You didn't fail me. You failed yourself. And I was the one trying to fix you. I couldn't fix you. I had to fix me." We sat there for a long time, not speaking. I think we both knew that this conversation wasn't about making amends or getting back together. It was about letting go. I had been holding on to a memory of what I thought we had, and she had been holding on to a version of herself that no longer existed. Finally, I stood up. "I'm not angry anymore. But I'm done, Emma. I need to move forward. I hope you can find what you need too." She nodded, standing up to hug me for the first time in months. It wasn't a passionate hug, but it was something more significant: acceptance. We both knew it was time to move on, not just from each other, but from everything that had kept us stuck. The next day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was like I had closed the final chapter of my old life. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Now I could focus on the future, on the life I was building with Sarah, on the work I was doing with the foundation, on the man I had become. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that cafe months ago. I had shed the parts of myself that weren't truly mine, and I was ready to step into the future I had worked so hard to create. Looking out over the city from my office window, I smiled. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. The past was behind me, and the future was full of possibility. And this time, I was in control. In life, don't let others define your worth. Build your success on your own terms, not based on the expectations or judgments of others. Surround yourself with people who value you for who you truly are, not for what you can offer them. It's okay to let go of toxic relationships and the past. Doing so is an act of self-care and strength. Embrace change, take risks, and remember that true fulfillment comes from living authentically and with purpose. It's never too late to take control of your life and pursue what truly makes you happy.